Why Roman emperors rejected deadly bows, but savage mercenaries were forced to save Rome. Rome conquered the world with the sword, but almost lost it because of an arrow. While the legionaries hid behind their iron shields, the fate of the world was in the hands of mercenaries they called savages. The Roman Empire, a colossus of military might and organizational genius, stood for centuries as the dominant power in the Western world. Its legions, disciplined and formidable, were the envy and terror of its enemies. Yet, within this seemingly invincible war machine lay a profound paradox. A deep-seated cultural aversion to the bow, a weapon that proved devastatingly effective in the hands of their adversaries. This rejection, rooted in the very concept of Roman virtus, or virtue, nearly brought the empire to its knees and ultimately forced Rome to rely on the very people it often disdained, foreign mercenaries, to defend its borders and preserve its legacy. The story of Rome's relationship with the bow is not merely a tale of military tactics, but a window into its cultural values, its adaptability, and ultimately, its decline, a narrative woven with threads of pride, prejudice, and desperate pragmatism. The core of this conflict lay in the Roman understanding of warfare and courage. For a Roman legionary, battle was not merely a strategic exercise, it was a personal test of physical bravery and martial prowess. The ideal combat scenario involved close-quarters engagement, where a soldier could look his enemy in the eye, feel his breath, and demonstrate his virtus through direct confrontation. This ethos was deeply embedded in their training and their self-perception, a cornerstone of what it meant to be a Roman soldier. The primary tools of this intimate combat were the gladius, a short, thrusting sword designed for brutal efficiency in tight formations, and the scutum, a heavy, rectangular shield that formed an impenetrable wall in the famous Roman tortoise formation. Roman training was meticulously focused on the mastery of these weapons, emphasizing disciplined formations, coordinated movements, and the brutal efficiency of hand-to-hand fighting. Every drill, every maneuver, was designed to prepare the legionary for the moment of impact, the clash of steel and flesh, where personal courage was the ultimate arbiter of victory. The very essence of Roman military identity was forged in the crucible of direct, visceral combat, where personal courage and physical strength were paramount, a tradition passed down through generations of warriors. To fire an arrow from 100 meters away, to strike an enemy without ever facing him directly, was seen as fundamentally un-Roman. It lacked the personal courage, the directness, and the honor that defined their martial ethos. Such a method of fighting was perceived as cowardly, a way to avoid the true test of a warrior, a tactic for those who lacked the bravery to stand face-to-face with their foes. The bow was often considered a weapon of the East, associated with nomadic tribes and effeminate peoples who shied away from the true test of strength and will. This cultural bias was not enshrined in law, no imperial decree forbade its use, but it was deeply ingrained in the Roman psyche, a powerful unwritten rule that shaped their military doctrine and equipment choices. The Roman soldier was a hammer, designed to crush and overwhelm through sheer physical presence and disciplined aggression, not a distant, elusive hunter. This cultural preference, while fostering an incredibly resilient and effective heavy infantry, also created a critical blind spot in their military capabilities, a vulnerability that would be brutally exposed on the battlefields of the East, costing them dearly in blood and prestige, a lesson learned through bitter experience. The Roman military system, with its emphasis on heavy infantry, was a marvel of its time. The legionary, clad in segmented armor, larica segmentata, and armed with his gladius and pilum, a heavy javelin designed to bend upon impact, rendering it unusable by the enemy, was a formidable opponent in a pitched battle on favorable terrain. Their tactics revolved around disciplined formations like the tortoise, testudo, which offered protection from missiles, but primarily served to allow them to close the distance for melee combat. The Roman genius lay in organization, logistics, and the ability to project power through disciplined marching and engineering feats. Their roads, their camps, their siege engines were all testaments to an unparalleled military infrastructure. However, this strength was also its weakness when confronted with enemies who fought differently, who refused to conform to Roman expectations of battle. The Parthians, for instance, understood this weakness perfectly. They did not seek to engage the Romans in a head-on clash of infantry, which would have been suicidal against the disciplined legions. Instead, they employed tactics that exploited the Roman lack of ranged capability and their reliance on close-quarters fighting, a strategy of attrition and evasion. The catastrophic Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC stands as a stark and bloody testament to the perils of this Roman prejudice. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome and a member of the First Triumvirate, led 7 legions, approximately 40,000 men, into Parthian territory, driven by ambition and a desire for military glory, hoping to emulate the conquests of Caesar and Pompey. He faced the Parthian general Surina, whose forces were composed primarily of horse archers and cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry, a combination of speed, firepower, and shock. The clash that ensued was a tactical nightmare for the Romans, a brutal lesson in the devastating power of a weapon they had so readily dismissed. Crassus, overconfident and perhaps underestimating his enemy, marched his legions across the open plains of Mesopotamia, an ideal terrain for the highly mobile Parthian cavalry, but a death trap for heavy infantry. As Crassus's legions marched, they were met not with the expected close-quarters engagement, but with a relentless, suffocating hail of arrows. The Parthian horse archers, masters of the Parthian shot, firing backward while retreating at full gallop, circled the Roman formations, unleashing volleys of arrows that pierced armor, found gaps in shields, and inflicted horrific casualties. The Romans, accustomed to closing with the enemy, found themselves utterly helpless, trapped in a swirling vortex of death. Their heavy infantry, designed for melee, was static and exposed, unable to effectively retaliate against an enemy that refused to stand and fight. The arrows, tipped with hardened iron, penetrated the legionaries' hands, pinning them to their shields, a gruesome image of their impotence, their inability to even defend themselves properly. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. The Parthians had an ingenious supply chain, with camels carrying vast quantities of arrows, ensuring their archers never ran out of ammunition. The Roman pilum, designed for a single devastating throw before melee, was useless against an enemy that kept its distance. The Roman cavalry, far fewer in number and less agile than their Parthian counterparts, were quickly routed or cut down, leaving the legions completely exposed. The battle lasted for hours, a slow, agonizing slaughter. Crassus's son, Publius, leading a desperate cavalry charge, was cut off and killed. Crassus himself, after suffering immense losses, attempted to negotiate, only to be betrayed and executed, his head reportedly used as a prop in a play. The defeat was an unmitigated disaster, one of the worst in Roman history. Over 20,000 legionaries were killed and 10,000 captured, a staggering loss of manpower and prestige. Carry was a profound shock to the Roman psyche, a moment of brutal realization. Their pride, their unwavering belief in the superiority of their close combat doctrine, was literally killing them. It was here that Rome truly understood that their cultural aversion to the bow was a strategic liability, a weakness that could be exploited with devastating effect by enemies who embraced different forms of warfare. The lesson was harsh but undeniable. The world was changing, and Rome, if it wished to survive, needed to adapt. The ghost of Carry would haunt Roman military strategists for centuries, a constant reminder of the cost of inflexibility, a scar on the empire's military honor. The immediate aftermath of Carry did not lead to a wholesale adoption of the bow by Roman citizens. The cultural stigma remained powerful, too deeply ingrained to be easily shed. Instead, Rome, ever pragmatic in the face of necessity, found a solution through outsourcing. If Roman citizens refused to train with bows, then Rome would simply hire those who did. This led to the formalization and expansion of the auxilia, auxiliary units composed of non-Roman citizens from across the empire and beyond. These units were crucial for providing specialized military capabilities that the legions lacked, and among the most vital were the archers. The Roman military, while maintaining its core identity, became a more diverse and adaptable force through the integration of these specialized units, a testament to its capacity for practical innovation despite cultural resistance. Cretan archers, renowned for their skill since the time of the Greek city-states, were highly sought after. Their long tradition of archery made them invaluable, their composite bows capable of impressive range and penetration. Syrian archers, particularly from Emesa and Palmyra, were also prized for their accuracy and discipline, often serving as mounted archers, adding another layer of mobility and tactical flexibility. Numidian cavalry, often equipped with javelins but also incorporating archers, provided swift and agile skirmishing forces, perfect for reconnaissance and harassing actions, their light horses ideal for the desert terrain. These auxiliary archers, often serving for decades to earn Roman citizenship for themselves and their families, became an indispensable part of the Roman war machine. They were deployed on the flanks of legions, providing covering fire, harassing enemy formations and countering enemy archers. They were the eyes and ears of the army, the skirmishers who softened up the enemy before the legions delivered the decisive blow. They protected the legions from missile fire, allowing the heavy infantry to close the distance and engage in their preferred close-quarters combat. The Roman army, in essence, became a sophisticated machine built from foreign parts. The legionary remained the powerful hammer, the core of the army, but the mercenary archers were the flexible, adaptable shield that protected Rome from being massacred by guerrilla tactics and ranged warfare. This pragmatic approach allowed Rome to maintain its cultural identity while effectively addressing its military shortcomings. It was a testament to Roman adaptability, a willingness to compromise on tradition when the survival of the empire was at stake, even if it meant relying on those they considered culturally inferior, a necessary evil for imperial survival. As the centuries progressed, particularly into the late Roman Empire, the reliance on foreign soldiers and specialized units only deepened. The traditional Roman legion, composed of citizen soldiers, began to wane. Economic crises, demographic shifts, and the increasing pressure from barbarian incursions on all fronts meant that Rome struggled to recruit and train sufficient numbers of its own citizens. The military landscape had also fundamentally changed. The rise of highly mobile, mounted archers, particularly among the Huns and various Germanic tribes, presented a new and existential threat that the traditional Roman infantry was ill-equipped to handle on its own. The empire's vast borders, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, required a constant and diverse military presence, and the traditional legionary model, once its greatest strength, was becoming unsustainable in the face of these new challenges. By the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was in its death throes, often referred to as the collapse. The once mighty legions were a shadow of their former selves, their numbers dwindling, their discipline sometimes faltering. The empire's defense increasingly fell to foederati, barbarian tribes allied with Rome, often settled within imperial territory, who provided military service in exchange for land and subsidies. These foederati were not merely auxiliary units. They were often entire tribal groups, fighting under their own leaders, sometimes with their own customs and loyalties, a complex and often volatile arrangement. This shift represented a profound change in the nature of the Roman army, moving away from a centralized, citizen-based force to a more decentralized, mercenary-dependent one. The Roman state, weakened by internal strife, political instability, and external pressures, found itself increasingly unable to project its own military power without significant foreign assistance, a stark contrast to its earlier self-sufficiency. Generals like Aetius, often called the last of the Romans, found themselves in a precarious position, relying heavily on these mercenary forces, even those who had once been Rome's most feared enemies. Aetius famously used Hunnic mercenaries, led by Attila himself at one point, to fight against other barbarian groups like the Visigoths and Franks. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains in 451 AD, where Aetius, leading a coalition of Romans and foederati, including Visigoths and Franks, faced Attila's Huns and their allies, is a prime example of this reliance. It was a battle where Roman military leadership, combined with the fighting prowess of various barbarian groups, managed to halt the Hunnic advance, a desperate alliance against a common, terrifying foe. This was the ultimate irony. Rome, which had once disdained the bow and the savage tactics of its eastern foes, now depended on the very descendants of those who had wielded such weapons to protect its crumbling borders. The Roman army, in its final iteration, was a patchwork of diverse peoples and fighting styles, a far cry from the homogeneous legions of the Republic and early Empire, a testament to how far the mighty had fallen. The Roman army of blood, the citizen soldier force that had built the empire, was effectively bankrupt. Without the mounted archers of Germanic or Hunnic origin, the frontiers of Rome would have collapsed centuries earlier, overwhelmed by the sheer mobility and ranged firepower of their adversaries. These mercenaries, often viewed with suspicion and contempt by the Roman populace, were forced to save Rome not out of loyalty or affection, but out of a complex web of treaties, payments, and self-interest. They were the ones who possessed the skills and the weapons, particularly the bow, that the Romans had so stubbornly refused to master. They were the modern soldiers of their time, capable of countering the mobile, ranged warfare that had become dominant across the vast Eurasian steppe. The empire's inability to recruit and train its own citizens in these crucial skills meant that it had to turn to outsiders. This dependence created a dangerous dynamic, as the loyalty of these foederati was often conditional and could shift with changing circumstances, leading to further instability. Rome, in its final desperate decades, was no longer dictating terms but was instead a client, dependent on the military prowess of those it had once conquered or dismissed as barbarians. The The empire's survival hinged on these foreign fighters, who, by wielding the very weapons Rome had rejected, became the unlikely saviors of a civilization that had lost the capacity to defend itself with its own hands. The very barbarians who threatened Rome were also its last line of defense, a paradox that underscored the empire's profound transformation, a tragic end to a glorious beginning. It is crucial to understand that this was not a matter of emperors creating a specific law prohibiting the bow. Such a decree would have been impractical and likely ignored, given the realities of warfare. Rather, it was a deeply ingrained cultural and military tradition that marginalized the weapon, preferring the heavy infantry for reasons of perceived virtue and honor. The emperors and the military establishment, steeped in this tradition, simply did not prioritize its widespread adoption or training among Roman citizens. The Roman military education system, focused on the gladius and scutum, left little room for extensive archery training, which required years of dedicated practice to master. This cultural inertia, combined with the practical difficulties of mass-producing effective composite bows and training large numbers of archers, meant that the bow remained a specialized weapon, largely relegated to auxiliary units. The shift towards reliance on mercenaries was not because these foreign fighters saved Rome out of kindness or altruism. Instead, the empire became increasingly dependent on these foederati because it had lost the capacity to recruit, train, and equip its own citizens in the evolving arts of warfare, particularly in ranged combat. The proud Roman legionary, once the epitome of military might, found himself increasingly outmatched by the swift, arrow-wielding warriors of the steppes and forests. The story of Rome and the bow is a complex narrative of cultural pride, strategic miscalculation, and ultimately, pragmatic adaptation, where the very weapons and tactics once scorned became indispensable for the empire's survival. It is a powerful reminder that even the most formidable empires can be brought to their knees not just by external enemies, but by their own internal biases and an unwillingness to adapt to a changing world. The legacy of Rome's rejection of the bow serves as a timeless lesson in the dangers of military conservatism and the often unforeseen consequences of cultural pride in the face of evolving threats. This historical narrative finds an intriguing counterpoint in the fate of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium. While the Western Empire crumbled under the weight of its internal contradictions and external pressures, the Eastern half endured for another 1,000 years. A significant factor in its longevity was its willingness to learn from past mistakes and adapt its military doctrine. The Byzantines, facing constant threats from highly mobile, mounted archers from the east, notably the Sassanid Persians and later the Arabs and Turks, shed the old Roman prejudice against the bow. They not only integrated archers more thoroughly into their native forces but also developed sophisticated cavalry units known as cataphracts. These were heavily armored horsemen, often equipped with lances but crucially, also trained as master archers, wielding powerful composite bows. This combination of shock cavalry and ranged firepower allowed the Byzantines to effectively counter their enemies, demonstrating that when Rome finally embraced the bow, albeit in its eastern incarnation, it found a path to enduring military success. The evolution of the Byzantine army, from its Roman roots to its highly specialized and adaptable form, stands as a powerful testament to the idea that the initial Roman aversion to the bow was indeed a critical strategic flaw, one that the more pragmatic Eastern Empire ultimately overcame. The survival of Byzantium, in stark contrast to the fall of the West, underscores the profound impact that military innovation and the abandonment of outdated cultural biases can have on the destiny of an empire, a final, resounding echo of the arrow's true power.